Atlanta is on fire right now. Offset, one of the most respected names to ever come out of that city, publicly declared that Rylo Rodriguez was no longer welcome there, banned him in front of the whole internet. And Rylo pulled up to Atlanta anyway. And now what started as one lyric on one album has escalated into something that has the entire hip-hop world watching, waiting, and picking sides. Because behind the Instagram stories and the viral clips, there is a level of history, alliance, and unspoken tension between major camps that makes this situation far more explosive than anything you have seen playing out on your timeline. Yo, what's good, fam? If you have been following this even loosely, you already know this thing is getting serious. But we are not here to just skim the surface. We got the full picture, the real context, and the deeper story that most people are completely missing. Because the truth behind why this conflict hit the way it did is more complex than anyone is giving it credit for. And we are about to reveal all of it. Stay locked in, because what we are about to break down goes way beyond one band, rapper, and one city. This is about loyalty, power, and the fault lines running right through the heart of Atlanta's hip-hop scene. Before we get into the timeline of exactly how this exploded, you need to understand who these two men are and why the conflict between them carries the weight that it does. Let's start with Offset. Born Kiari Kendrell Cephas in Lawrenceville, Georgia, Offset spent years grinding alongside Quavo and Takeoff before Migos became one of the most influential rap groups in modern history. The triplet flow that Migos popularized essentially reshaped the entire sound of mainstream hip-hop for nearly a decade. Songs like Versace, Bad and Bougie, and Motorsport did not just chart, they redefined what Atlanta rap could look like on a commercial level. Offset's individual contribution to that legacy was massive. His verses were consistently sharp, his fashion sense set trends, and his personal life kept him in the public eye even during periods when the music slowed down. But here's where it gets real. After Takeoff was tragically shot and killed in November 2022, Migos as a functioning unit effectively ended. The grief that surrounded that loss was public and devastating, and it forced Offset into a completely new chapter. One where he had to prove he could carry his own name without the group's energy behind him. He had released his debut solo album, Father of Four, back in 2019 to a strong reception. But the post-Migos era demanded something different. It demanded that he reestablish his identity from scratch, without the comfort of his brothers beside him, in a landscape that had shifted dramatically since Migos first took over. That process has been complicated by public controversies, changing industry dynamics, and the natural difficulty of rebuilding when grief and reinvention are happening at the same time. Despite all of that, Offset's influence in Atlanta remains enormous. He carries real history in that city, real relationships, and real respect earned over more than a decade at the top of the game. Now let me introduce Rylo Rodriguez to anyone who has not been keeping up. Born Markel Row in Mobile, Alabama, Rylo built his reputation from the ground up through a style of music that hit different than almost anything else coming out during his early years. His storytelling was raw, deeply emotional, and rooted in the kind of lived experience that resonates immediately with listeners who come from similar environments. He was not chasing trends. He was writing his life, and people felt that instantly. His early mixtapes and projects circulated through streaming platforms and street networks simultaneously, building him a fan base that was fiercely loyal long before mainstream media caught up to what he was doing. The connection that changed everything for Rylo's career was Lil Baby. One of the biggest names in all of hip-hop, Lil Baby recognized something in Rylo that aligned with the 4PF ethos: authenticity, hunger, and a voice that could not be duplicated. Rylo signed to Glass Window Entertainment and 4PF, becoming one of Lil Baby's flagship artists and one of the most visible representatives of that camp's musical identity. Their collaborations together, including joint projects and countless features, deepened the bond between them both professionally and personally. Inside Atlanta's hip-hop ecosystem, when you are that close to Lil Baby, you are not just an artist, you are family. And family carries implications that go beyond music. That connection would eventually matter a great deal once this conflict broke open. Now, before we get into the lyric that started everything, let me keep it 100 with y'all. Because to truly understand why one line on one album detonated the way it did, you first need to understand the tension that was already simmering underneath the surface, long before Rylo ever stepped into a booth. This is the origin of the beef. And it does not start with Rylo at all. It starts with Offset and Lil Baby. For years, Offset and Lil Baby have occupied the same city, the same genre, and increasingly the same cultural space. But the relationship between them has been anything but warm. In the post-Migos era, as Offset worked to reestablish himself as a solo force, Lil Baby was doing the opposite of struggling. Baby was ascending at a pace that few artists in the modern era have matched. He became one of the most streamed artists on the planet, built 4PF into one of the most powerful camps in hip-hop, and essentially became the new face of Atlanta rap for an entire generation of listeners. Albums like Harder Than Ever, My Turn, and Voice of the Heroes with Gunna cemented his status not just as a commercial force, but as a genuine cultural leader. That kind of rise does not happen in a vacuum. And inside a city as competitive and relationship-driven as Atlanta, it inevitably creates friction with the veterans who came before. But yo, this is where the story gets deeper than just two rappers competing for the same space. The warmth between Offset and Lil Baby has cooled significantly over time, something that has been felt across the industry even when it was rarely stated out loud. Shifting alliances among shared associates, producers and executives quietly navigating loyalties, subtle public interactions that fans have analyzed exhaustively. All of it contributed to a growing sense that these two camps were no longer on the same page. And in Atlanta, where your relationships define your standing as much as your music does, that kind of cooling carries real consequences. When people inside the city started noticing the distance between these two worlds, it changed how they read every interaction involving anyone connected to either camp. See, in Atlanta, your camp is your statement. Who you are signed to, who you move with, who you call family. All of that communicates your loyalties without you ever having to say a word. And Rylo Rodriguez is not just any 4PF artist. He is one of Lil Baby's closest, most trusted collaborators. Someone whose entire professional identity is intertwined with Baby's world. The two of them have recorded together extensively. Their creative chemistry is documented across years of collaborative work. And within the 4PF structure, Rylo occupies a position of genuine closeness that sets him apart from peripheral signings. So when Rylo stepped into the studio and recorded a lyric that put Offset's name in a negative light, even indirectly, it did not land as a solo move. It landed as a camp statement. Whether that was the intention or not, the existing tension between Offset and Lil Baby meant that Rylo's words carried a charge that a lyric from any other artist simply would not have carried. The fuse was already there. Rylo's line just lit it. So check it. July 2026, Rylo Rodriguez drops his highly anticipated album, SKAT, a project that arrived with significant buildup in his evolution as a solo artist. The album received immediate attention from fans and critics, generating strong streaming numbers and debate across social media. But within hours of the album dropping, one specific lyric became the only thing anyone wanted to talk about. The line was this: "Free bands, I'm locked in with Casino, but I'm not Offset." On the surface, the lyric reads like a technical flex involving legitimate industry relationships. Free Bands is Future's label. Casino is a respected Atlanta rapper with deep ties to Future and the broader Free Bands world. The wordplay appears designed to establish Rylo's connections while making clear he occupies his own identity. But here's where it gets real spicy. Because context inside hip-hop is everything. And when you drop Offset's name in that construction against the backdrop of already existing tension between Offset and Baby's camp, people do not assume the interpretation is harmless. Within hours, clips of the lyric had spread across TikTok with reaction videos piling up faster than anyone could track. On X, the line was being debated from dozens of angles simultaneously. YouTube commentary channels dedicated entire videos to unpacking whether the line was a real diss or simply clever wordplay. Hip-hop blogs published takes within the same news cycle the album dropped. The velocity at which this single line moved through the internet was remarkable even by modern standards. And it forced the situation into territory that neither artist may have initially anticipated. Offset did not stay quiet. And this is where the situation crossed from music debate into something far more serious. Through his Instagram stories, Offset responded directly and personally. He did not address the lyric ambiguously or leave room for interpretation. He came at Rylo Rodriguez with pointed criticism that touched on his contract situation, his origins, and his perceived motivations for mentioning Offset's name. The tone of Offset's response made clear that he did not view the line as harmless wordplay. He viewed it as disrespect, the kind of disrespect that required a public correction. But the statement that turned this situation into a full cultural moment was Offset declaring Atlanta a no-fly zone for Rylo Rodriguez. Those words landed like a detonation across social media. For people outside of hip-hop's internal culture, it might have read as dramatic internet language, but for anyone who understands how Atlanta operates, how deeply connected local reputation, neighborhood relationships, and industry loyalty are woven into the fabric of that city's rap scene, those words carried a completely different weight. Telling someone they are no longer welcome in a city is not a throwaway statement. It is a declaration of standing, a public drawing of lines. Fans and media outlets immediately began debating what the statement meant in practical terms, whether it was a genuine street warning or simply social media theatrics. The real kicker, though, came when private Instagram messages exchanged between Offset and Rylo began circulating across social media. Screenshots of the alleged direct message conversation spread rapidly, with fans on every platform working to authenticate and interpret what they were looking at. The messages reportedly showed a more personal dimension to the conflict than either artist had displayed publicly. Accusations and language that transformed the situation from what might have been dismissed as posturing into something that felt genuinely heated between two people with real frustration with each other. Whether every screenshot was entirely authentic mattered less in the moment than the fact that millions of people were consuming them and forming opinions based on their content. The leaked DMs added fuel to a fire that was already burning fast, and they ensured that the story would continue generating attention for days beyond the initial incident. Then came the move that elevated everything to another level entirely. Reports began circulating through social media posts, location tags, videos, and the kind of organic online detective work that hip-hop Twitter specializes in, that Rylo Rodriguez had traveled to Atlanta after Offset's public warning. Let that sink in for a minute. Offset had declared Atlanta a no-fly zone in front of millions of people. And Rylo, if the reports were accurate, had responded not with words but with presence. He simply showed up. The symbolism of that act was impossible to overstate in the context of hip-hop culture. Appearing in Atlanta was not just a geographic decision. It was a statement. It was Rylo answering Offset's warning with a refusal to be warned, even without a single additional word exchanged publicly. Simply being in that city after being told not to come communicated everything his supporters needed to understand about where he stood. Fans who backed Rylo immediately celebrated the move across social media, framing it as courage. Offset's supporters interpreted it as recklessness bordering on outright provocation. The debate consumed timelines for days. Now, for y'all who might not fully understand why Atlanta specifically carries this kind of weight, let me explain. Atlanta is not just a city where a lot of rappers happen to be from. It is the cultural capital of American hip-hop in the modern era. Its influence on sound, fashion, business, slang, and lifestyle has dominated the genre for well over 2 decades. What happens in Atlanta sets the terms for what the rest of the country talks about. Local connections in Atlanta are not casual relationships. They are ecosystems built over years, involving producers, executives, neighborhood figures, venue owners, label connections, and longtime personal bonds. To be embraced by Atlanta is to have access to something money cannot simply purchase. And to be publicly rejected by a veteran with deep roots in that city carries consequences that extend far beyond any single beef. Telling someone they cannot come to Atlanta is telling them they are cut off from a world that matters enormously to their professional and personal reputation. It is why Offset's statement hit so hard, and it is why Rylo's apparent response hit equally hard. Both moves were understood within a cultural grammar that Atlanta insiders and devoted hip-hop fans speak fluently, even when outsiders struggle to understand why anyone was still talking about it. Fan reactions across platforms split almost perfectly along camp lines, and the energy on both sides was intense. Offset supporters argued that Rylo's lyric was unnecessary disrespect towards someone who had earned his standing through years of contribution to the culture. From their perspective, you do not take shots at Atlanta legends without context. And framing Offset's name as a distinction rather than a compliment inside of boast was exactly the kind of subtle disrespect that deserved a response. They pointed to Offset's history, The years behind Migos, the sacrifices made, the cultural contributions that shaped an entire era, and argued that a younger artist with far less tenure had no business swinging in that direction regardless of intent. Rylo supporters countered that the line was clearly wordplay, that Offset had read into it far more than was intended, and that the reaction said more about Offset's insecurity than about any real disrespect from Rylo. Their argument was simple. If you are secure in who you are, a lyric that mentions your name in passing does not require a declaration of war against an entire city. The fact that Offset responded so forcefully, in their view, revealed more about the underlying tension between the camps than it did about anything Rylo actually said. What made the public debate especially interesting was how quickly it expanded beyond the two artists themselves. Fans who had strong loyalties to either Lil Baby or the Migos legacy found themselves drawn into the conversation even when they had no prior opinion about Rylo or any specific grievance with Offset. The beef became a referendum on which camp held more cultural authority in Atlanta right now. And that question activated passions that ran far deeper than any single lyric could on its own. Reaction channels dedicated hours of content to debating the specifics. Live streams attracted tens of thousands of concurrent viewers. Podcasts that cover hip-hop had the situation as their lead story for multiple episodes. Comment sections on every major platform became battlegrounds where supporters of both camps argued their cases, with a level of conviction usually reserved for things far more consequential than a rap feud. The discourse was massive and sustained, in a way that only happens when the names involved genuinely matter to people, and when the stakes feel real enough to fight over. Now let's talk about the business side of this, because the streaming era has fundamentally changed what a rap feud actually means in commercial terms. Controversy is attention, and attention in 2026 translates directly into streams, views, followers, and industry invitations. The street's been talking about this for weeks, and every conversation, every argument in a comments section, every podcast take, every duet video on TikTok functions as free advertising for both artists, whether either of them planned it that way or not. When a rap conflict explodes across social media the way this one did, both artists involved experienced immediate spikes in algorithmic performance. People who had never heard of Rylo Rodriguez before went and found SKAT on streaming platforms specifically because of the drama. People who had not thought about Offset's solo catalog in months went back and revisited his work to understand who he was outside of Migos. Every reaction video that featured either artist music as a backdrop drove royalties. Every podcast episode that discussed the beef created new entry points for potential listeners. Both camps, whether they intended it or not, generated promotional value from a conflict that the internet amplified far beyond what traditional marketing budgets could have achieved. That is not to suggest the emotions were not real, but the commercial reality of modern hip-hop means that authentic conflict and strategic promotion are no longer cleanly separable. An artist can be genuinely upset, genuinely respond from that anger, and still benefit commercially from the attention that response generates. There is no contradiction there. It is simply the nature of an industry where visibility is currency and controversy is one of the most efficient generators of visibility that exists. Real talk, the evolution of how rap beef functions is one of the most significant cultural shifts in the genre over the last decade. In the era of Tupac and Biggie, or even Jay-Z and Nas, a beef was measured almost entirely by the diss tracks released. The music was the battlefield, and the quality of the verses determined the winner in the court of public opinion. That model still exists, but it has been layered over by an entirely new infrastructure of conflict. Instagram stories, X posts, live streams, podcasts, leaked messages, reaction content, and viral clips have all become simultaneous battlegrounds, where a feud unfolds in real time across multiple surfaces at once. Today, a rapper does not wait to record a response track. They open their phone, post to their story, and 50 million people see it before dinner. A single line on a Friday album release became a crisis by Saturday evening and a cultural phenomenon by Sunday. No diss track, no radio drop, just one lyric, one Instagram story, and an entire ecosystem of content creators, fans, and media outlets amplifying every development in real time. Now, this ain't just about two rappers arguing on the internet. This is about what this conflict reveals regarding the larger power structure inside Atlanta at this moment in time. When Offset responded the way he did, Fans immediately began mapping out what that meant for existing alliances. Where does Quavo stand? How do producers and executives who work with both camps navigate the situation? What does this mean for artists who have collaborated with people on both sides? How do Future's free band's connections factor in, given that Rylo invoked that world in the very lyric that started everything? These questions spread rapidly because the Atlanta hip-hop ecosystem is dense with overlapping relationships, and any public conflict between major figures creates ripple effects that touch dozens of adjacent careers and partnerships. The perception that Rylo's lyric was connected to a broader deterioration of the relationship between Offset's world and Lil Baby's camp meant that people were not simply watching two individuals argue. They were watching what they believed to be a proxy conflict for something much larger, a fault line running through Atlanta's hip-hop community that had been quietly growing for years before this one lyric brought it to the surface. One of the most interesting things about watching this unfold was trying to separate what was genuine emotion from what was performance. And the honest answer is that in 2026, inside the world of hip-hop social media, you almost cannot. Artists have learned to weaponize authenticity. A genuine grievance becomes a promotional tool the moment it goes online. A real warning becomes theater once thousands of people are watching to see whether it gets enforced. Offset may have been genuinely furious. Rylo may have genuinely meant no disrespect. Both things can be true simultaneously, and the conflict still generates millions of views, thousands of takes, and a career-altering amount of attention for everyone involved. The line between what is felt privately and what is performed publicly has become essentially impossible for outside observers to locate. As we come toward the end of this breakdown, let's revisit the core of what actually happened and what it means going forward. One lyric on one album triggered a chain reaction involving a public declaration of war, leaked private messages, viral social media debates, alleged cross-city travel, and sustained media coverage that lasted weeks. The speed and scale of that chain reaction speaks to how charged the atmosphere inside Atlanta's hip-hop scene actually is right now. How much underlying tension was waiting for a single spark before it became visible to the public. And that is the part of this story that gets lost when people focus only on the drama of the surface level events. The Instagram stories, the no-fly zone declaration, the leaked DMs, Rylo showing up anyway. All of that is compelling content, but none of it would have carried the weight it did if there was not something real and substantial already building underneath it for years. Real talk, situations like this do not erupt out of nowhere. They erupt because the conditions for eruption already exist. And all that is needed is one moment that gives everyone permission to stop pretending everything is fine. Whether this conflict escalates further into diss tracks, additional public exchanges, or something more serious, or whether it eventually cools down and gets folded into the long history of beefs that burned bright and then faded, it has already accomplished something significant. It has made visible a set of tensions, alliances, and competing interests that were operating beneath the surface of Atlanta's public hip-hop narrative. At the end of the day, the real story here is not whether Rylo Rodriguez physically entered Atlanta after Offset told him not to come. The real story is what this conflict reveals about where Atlanta's hip-hop community actually is right now. It reveals that the post-Migos landscape has reshuffled power dynamics in ways that are still being negotiated. It reveals that Lil Baby's gravitational pull within that landscape has created a new center of gravity that inevitably puts him and his closest artists in contact with the legacy figures who preceded them. It reveals that loyalty inside this world is both deeply personal and publicly performative simultaneously, and that the internet now functions as the arena where all of those dynamics play out in front of the entire world in real time. It also reveals something that fans of Atlanta rap have quietly known for a while now, that the peace between certain camps is maintained by distance, and the moment that distance collapses, everything that was being held back comes rushing forward at once. That is exactly what happened here. Rylo's lyric collapsed the distance. Offset's response confirmed that the distance had been doing a lot of work, and Rylo pulling up to Atlanta made clear that the next chapter of this story has not been written yet. One lyric, one response, one reported appearance in the city, and underneath all of it, years of shifting alliances, unspoken rivalries, personal grievances, and the enormous pressure of maintaining relevance, respect, and power inside a city that does not forgive weakness and never forgets disrespect. That is what Rylo versus Offset is really about. That is what everybody is really watching. And if history has taught us anything about Atlanta hip-hop, it is that the story is never truly over until the music says it is. What are your thoughts on how this situation unfolds from here? Is this beef only just getting started? Drop your take in the comments below and make sure you are locked in for absolutely everything coming next.